Hey guys, welcome to Black Ambassadors of Change. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. So before I start anything, happy Thanksgiving to everyone. And this week, let's talk turkey and Thanksgiving and what the African Americans were doing during the time Thanksgiving was first instituted. Black Ambassadors of Change is on. Take a look. Hey guys, welcome back to Black Ambassador of Change. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe again, guys. Please subscribe. Really important for you to subscribe and share. So let's talk Thanksgiving and the origins and what African Americans were doing. You know, you would think that Thanksgiving came along. What was the slaves to celebrate? But Thanksgiving has been a little bit more complicated than that for the slaves and African Americans on a whole. Because we celebrated Thanksgiving in different forms in West Africa before we became slaves. And it was a celebration of the harvest after the harvest and the rains and celebrating the crop. So we had a tradition of celebrating that, and that celebrated, there were drum beating and lots of food and the celebration of the yams. Hence, we still incorporate yams and corn into our stuff. Believe it or not, that did not come necessarily from the African American version of Thanksgiving, because a lot of that was done in Africa before we came here. So it's very interesting and dynamic and a lot of nuances. So I put together a great video that I would love you guys to take a look. And hopefully you learn a lot from it as much as I did. So take a look, guys, and I hope you enjoy. Please don't forget to watch the entire video. It's very important that you watch all the way to the end.
Traditionally, Thanksgiving is celebrated to give thanks for the previous harvest. In America, this dates back to 1621 when the harvest was celebrated by pilgrims who came from England to settle in the New World in an area named Plymouth Colony, which is now known as Massachusetts. However, prior to the settlers arriving to America, it was the practice of indigenous cultures of North America to express gratitude each year before the winter began, sharing and giving away in communal festivities that became translated as partakers of our plenty. It is essentially the same concept as what we know as Thanksgiving today. Thus, Thanksgiving has many different origins from different cultures. Africans also took the time to be thankful for what they had. The concept of giving thanks and celebrating harvest is a global tradition with equivalents in many African countries. In Ghana and Nigeria, a well-known harvest festival called the Yam Festival is celebrated. This harvest celebration is held in early August at the end of the rainy season when the yams are harvested. Yams are a staple food of many African diets, and a plentiful harvest is important for survival. The festival is celebrated with parades, dancing, songs, and drumming. I don't know about y'all, but I will be thinking about this as I prepare my yams for our Thanksgiving meal this week while watching the Thanksgiving Day parade and listening to songs. I'm sure the parade I will be watching will have some drumming in it too. In 1777, when the Continental Congress issued a decree for the 13 colonies to give thanks for their victory over the British at Saratoga, the African slaves also took part in the celebration, even though many had little to be thankful for. They created a tradition and continued a custom for celebrating rain and plenty of harvest. This was something they weren't just taught to do when coming to America, but rather it is something they had learned in many of the African cultures where they came from. The first African American Thanksgiving dinner during slavery most likely was cooked in an outside kitchen and consisted of cornmeal, salt pork, and homegrown vegetables. This was not the standard meal of slave owners, but more likely were scraps from the slave owner's table. Enslaved Americans often made soups and stews out of leftover food from the big house. Our Thanksgiving meals today will often leave a lot of leftovers to be stored in the refrigerator. However, slaves did not have the option of storing food as there was no refrigeration. They would have consumed everything they made the same day. Some historians believe the first African American Thanksgiving dinner was consumed by individuals eating with their hands. Leland Ferguson's book, Struggling with Pots in Colonial South Carolina, describes 45 bowls found at an archaeological dig on a former slave plantation. These bowls did not show cutlery marks, which led historians to believe that the colonial slaves ate with their hands, as was the tradition of their African ancestors. However, other historians, like Edward Kinney, believes these colonial African slaves constructed and used wooden bowls and spoons, a craft that originated in Africa. These wooden bowls and spoons would not leave cutlery marks. Colonial African American Thanksgiving meals could have had a mixture of flavors from Africa, Europe, and natives. Historians have suggested that many of the dishes from the first celebration with settlers and natives were likely prepared using traditional Native American spices and cooking methods. This is because the Pilgrims had no oven and their sugar supply had dwindled by the fall of 1621. Thus, traditions from these first Thanksgiving meals could have been passed down for many generations and may have been even used by some colonial African slaves. Slaves who worked in the field would often catch wild game, such as wild turkeys, to prepare for their family and friends. However, the taste of a wild turkey may be very different than what we are used to eating on Thanksgiving. Wild turkeys are known to have a very different taste than the farm-raised turkeys we consume today. Enslaved women would often make cornmeal cakes and pone cakes, something we still eat today. In fact, the typical Black American Thanksgiving dinner often contains many of the same foods, such as collard greens, cornbread stuffing, and candied yams, food that is often thought of as Southern or soul food. This is because many Black Americans, regardless if they reside on the West Coast, East Coast, or in the North, have family members that came from the South during the Great Migration. Unlike slaves working in the field, Thanksgiving meals for house slaves often consisted of food left over from the slave owner's family meal. Besides food, enslaved Americans participated in other activities on Thanksgiving as well. They would gather for church services where they preached about hope. They also entertained themselves by playing ball, wrestling, and running foot races. There was also fiddling, dancing, and whiskey drinking. Sometimes slave owners would place bets on which slave could drink the most without getting drunk. Not all enslaved African Americans viewed the holidays as a time of celebration and hope, though. Some believed the holidays only served to highlight their lack of freedom. Frederick Douglass described the holiday period as a psychological tool of the oppressor. Some enslaved African Americans used the day as an opportunity to escape. Some slaves had family members located on other plantations, so they would ask permission to visit their family, which required a written pass. Although some slave owners did not acknowledge Thanksgiving or other holidays, those who did may have been distracted with holiday or travel plans, which allowed slaves to prepare to run away. These enslaved individuals would stockpile supplies and wait for the opportunity to run during the holidays. In fact, Harriet Tubman helped her brothers escape during Christmas during the slave owners' relaxed holiday schedule. Although Americans had been unofficially celebrating Thanksgiving since 1621, it wasn't in fact officially recognized by the nation until 1863, after years of the United States being at civil war. In September 1863, Josepha Hale wrote directly to President Lincoln asking him to issue a proclamation that the last Thursday in November be a day of national thanksgiving. She was opposed to the idea of slavery, and she felt the nation needed a day of reconciliation and unity. Shortly after, on October 3, 1863, Lincoln issued a proclamation in celebration of a year filled with blessings of fruitful fields and healthful skies to establish the first national day of Thanksgiving. Lincoln proposed that God ordained the holiday. In his writings, he said, "While gratitude based on temporal things will eventually fail us, Thanksgiving is an act of communion with eternal God. As such, it anchors us to something that will last forever." Despite some people's beliefs, Thanksgiving did not originate in the South. In fact, Southerners in America rejected the idea of Thanksgiving. Southerners originally believed that Thanksgiving was a Yankee abolitionist holiday. In her book, Thanksgiving, an American Holiday in American History, Diana Cater Applebaum wrote, "Thanksgiving was above all a New England holiday, and New England was abolitionist territory." It was Northern evangelical Protestants who pushed the ideal of Thanksgiving, and they were strongly linked to the abolitionist movement. Many Northern ministers took the opportunity of Thanksgiving to speak against the moral wrongs of slavery. However, these beliefs were not held by politicians and slave owners in legal slave states. For example, Governor Henry A. Wise, a slave owner in Virginia, described Thanksgiving as a theatrical national claptrap that has aided other causes in setting thousands of pulpits to preaching Christian politics instead of humbly letting the carnal kingdom alone and preaching singly Christ crucified. By other causes, the governor was referring to abolitionism. The Black church also used Thanksgiving as an opportunity to promote civil rights. Reverend Benjamin W. Arnett, a well-known minister at Urbana, Ohio's St. Paul AME Church, gave a stirring sermon on November 30th, 1876, that addressed the importance of Thanksgiving, but also called on America to treat its free Black citizens with fairness and dignity in the coming years. The South did not participate in Thanksgiving until after the Civil War, when it was used as an opportunity to boost its failing economy. Many ingredients used in traditional Thanksgiving menus, such as cranberries and pumpkins, were not well known in the South. It was the rise of the mass media that helped to spread Thanksgiving menus swiftly in the South in the 20th century, as national women's magazines and national newspapers offered Southern readers advice on stuffing a turkey or baking a pumpkin pie. Southerners then took that information to add their own spin to traditional Thanksgiving meal items. These items, such as stuffing or dressing, were modified depending on the state. For example, dressing in Louisiana may have different ingredients than dressing in Florida. I hope you found this information interesting as I did. Leave a comment.